All right. So this is 152, and we're down to talk about investigations for incident response, and then more Splunk. So we start with this in here. Okay. So getting initial facts for an investigation, you need specific information that can guide you to a solution, not just, you need actionable information with things, useful things in it, like IP addresses and times that will help you search for more data. One big problem is time zones. If your investigation is over a large geographic area, most people just learn to use UTC for everything, but if you don't, then you've always got a headache trying to figure out which events happened within this time range in that time zone. So there's a few checklists that they have: incident summary, how it was detected, individual details of a system, network details, and malware details. These are all things you could gather. You have to have some kind of documentation system, like a file share or a wiki or something where you keep track of the incidents and your response to it. You have to make sure that the bad guys aren't reading that. That's why it should be limited and audited access. Don't put that on the target's network. It should be outside, where people connect to it outside the corporate system so that your attacker cannot see your defense measures. All right, and so here's the incident summary, the time it was detected, contact information of the people involved, everybody involved so you can reach them if you have questions later, the general nature, type of resource, how it was detected, which is typically, of course, something like an antivirus alert or something that pops up is what makes somebody realize that something bad is happening, or a user discovers something nasty happening, like they can't get their email or something. Then you keep unique identifier of the computers involved, who's been using the system, who's aware of it, is it ongoing, and to what extent do you have to keep it confidential. These are clearly important things you should know about. Let me just check for comments online. Amazon is investing $4 billion in Anthropic. Yeah, well, that makes sense. Claude is actually Anthropic. Yeah, Amazon is involved. Yeah, it's a separate company, but Amazon is like a big funder, just sort of like OpenAI and Microsoft. Yeah. All right, good. Let me move this over, and I can actually see something about the comments while the slides are visible. That's all professional and stuff. All right, so, and for incident detection, how did you detect it? What information did you get? From what source? Has it been validated? All security tools have a lot of false positives. They will flag things as malicious that aren't malicious. And have you preserved the data? Those are important facts. And how long has this detection source been going? And who has experience with it to help you decide whether this detection is meaningful, detection and error rates, and has you changed something about it? Because it's possible that you've changed something, you're just getting false positives from the new thing. So here's the individual system details, physical location, make and model, who's in the administrator, IP address, what kind of information is here, and what backups exist. Is it still connected? Is there malware? What remediation steps have been taken? And what data has been preserved? The logical questions, because clearly one thing you're going to want to do at an endpoint is just re-image it and lose everything on it at some point. So you'll have to decide how much of what's on there you need to preserve first. And your network details, your malicious IPs and domain names, and again, network diagrams and so on, so you can you can monitor network traffic, and that will help you track down the infected systems and what the bad guys are doing. And malware, same old thing. Where did you find it? File names and directories. What did the AV or whatever found it call it? Keep track of the hash. See if it's still running and doing more harm. Keep a copy of it, or know why you didn't. And indicators of compromise are quite valuable, of course. As we're talking to malware analysis class, you want things like files that are created, registry keys, network traffic, and things like that. And the information, did you submit it to something like VirusTotal? That is not recommended, because that could inform the bad guy that you're onto them. If you want to use VirusTotal, the thing to do is calculate the hash value and then just search the hash value on VirusTotal to see if they already know about the malware. Then you benefit from knowing about it, but it is not sent as a sample to the antivirus companies, which could be detected by the bad guys, and then they would know you caught them. So keep track of what you do, and I mentioned this before, be professional. Your case notes may appear in court, so don't write slang terms or insults or jokes or anything on the pages. Remember, this stuff might go to court. And so you'll have a timeline. Here's an infected email attachment was opened by somebody at this time. Then this created some metadata. Looks like a prefetch folder as something was launched. Then another one. Then Bob called the IT security department to report a suspicious email. He opened the prior day. That was the next day. Then they collected live response data. So, this is what happened. A timeline you keep track of. And so your typical priorities are to know when did it occur. I'd say knowing who broke in is not a very high priority for most people. They mostly just want to know what harm did they do and how do we get them out. But you could worry about who broke in. They're very important to know what they accessed and are they still inside. This is super important. This is why every time you read somebody got a breach, you want to know, did they get the passwords, the credit card numbers, and things like that. You want to know what they accessed, and you clearly want to know if they're still inside to kick them out. Knowing when it occurred helps you find that information because you know what time range to search the logs for. And who broke in is a lower priority, although if it's from a foreign nation and you don't have any customers in that nation, you might just block the whole nation at your firewall. But other than that, I doubt you really want to go very far trying to worry about who broke in. And so special cases, if you're in PCI for financial information, then you might want a list of compromised account numbers and dates so you can put some kind of credit watch on those accounts or something. And you'll have legal counsel, of course, to figure out what laws may have been broken and what you need to do about it. So management should set reasonable goals. Amateur management will have ridiculous goals like we want no intrusions or we want 100% uptime, and you can tell them no amount of money will buy that. Nobody has that. The Department of Defense, Google, Yahoo, nobody has that. So you have to lower your expectation. You see, how does larceny relate? Well, larceny is the one I could understand. I actually trouble with county range. Larceny is if your own staff are stealing money, which certainly happens. I think that's what larceny is. So, yeah. And no, I think it's for money, financial. So your own staff may be embezzling the money, and that may be something you discover as part of an incident. And then you may want to gather data to go to court and prosecute your own staff. You may have to. All right. All right, so you consider what reasonable goals are, consider your evidence. Like I say, legal action and identifying who attacked you is often impossible because they just bounce their attack off random foreign servers. And, of course, if you don't detect it quickly, a lot of the evidence may be lost as it's too late for the logs to be retained and such. So here's an example. The person detected an automated vulnerability scan. If you do the boss of the SOC, this is one of the first clues we have. You get an automated scan, which is really obvious, and now you know you're under attack. So they found they had set up a website selling illegal files on the machine. This happened a lot. I think there used to be one at PG&E and at AT&T years ago. This was a really common thing network administrators would do, was have a secret server serving up pornography or stolen wares or something. Let's see. Yeah, good. I see people playing larceny. And then, so management wanted to find and prosecute the attacker, but of course, that's a waste of time. Actually, finding the person attacking you is next to impossible. It would be far more realistic to just clean it up, remove the vulnerability so it doesn't happen again, and proceed. Trying to hunt down who hacked you is usually hopeless. Anyway, let's take a look at a Kahoot. Hey there. What's that?
I had to make it on campus once this semester.
Yeah, it's not as you can see, not too many people are doing that. I've been having like 6 or 7 in my other classes, but I think coming in on Saturday is like another level of inconvenience. Especially since I think most of the people that come in don't have computers, and there's no computer lab on Saturday, so I think few of them are motivated to come in on Saturday.
Well, I actually have another class on Saturday, so I think it's good.
Well, that's good. Yeah. Well, Kirk hadn't been here in 2 years, and this new guy started to clean out the lab, and he was here the next day. I mean, somehow
That was a beacon.
that was like the bat signal.
Just like the correlation crisis. Again, brought me back. I was like,
Somehow he found out. And
so I went to that job fair that was hosted by the department. I spoke with
it already happened?
Yeah, that was online.
Oh, I would have put it on my website, but I never got an answer asking Steve when it was. Anyway.
Yeah, I was during your class the other night on Thursday.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I spoke with the guy from FBI.
Oh, good. I'm glad you're at the job
I
fair.
have issues. I asked him about it. I'm like, how much is this actually a deal breaker? And he's like, well. And I'm like, oh my God, are you serious? So.
They keep talking about forgiving stuff, and then it goes back and forth. Yeah. Like marijuana is the big one. All right. So which of these is a false statement? Yep. It's not that common that you have an insider. When you do, it's much worse. But most attackers don't have insiders. All right, which of these do you normally not perform? I think you were around when this happened. This really happened on campus. The guy claimed that we couldn't see anything because he'd locked it all up for FBI analysis. This is garbage. Nobody does that. Anyway. But we had a CTO that claimed he was doing that. Anyway. All right. Which detail is not normally important together? And this one here, we could argue, this is becoming more and more important now that we're banning Huawei and Kaspersky and stuff. We're beginning to worry about this, but it's not as common as the other things. Anyway, all right. Oh, good, okay. That's right, a good name. And Tark is a known. All right, good. All right. So let's go back to the slides. So, developing leads. So leads are actionable items. You learn some information that you can use to guide your further investigation, just like every cop show. And so like a network indicator, like a domain name or identity of a person or something about an issue, some information that helps you search for more information. So you need relevant, actionable, and sufficiently detailed information that guides you. So then you clarify the data, make sure it's true. It is very, very common that the end user has some kind of complaint, and it doesn't actually mean they've been hacked. This is the common thing. People think they've been hacked, but it turns out that just something more innocent has happened. So you have to examine if this is really, in fact, part of the incident we're interested in, and then you figure out what to do. So if the intrusion detection system generates an alert, then if it's connecting to a command and control server, that would indicate infection, although nothing is ever infallible. So you find your internal origin, inspect the raw packets, see what other connections are made by that host, and figure out whether this is in fact part of your incident or not. If it is, that would be very handy, because then you can easily detect other infected machines by just looking at the network traffic. So if especially when humans are the source, although all your other security contraptions also can have false positives. But anyway, people may be misinterpreting normal traffic, so you have to verify that it's in fact useful. Then you turn it into indicators. Turn it into something you can quickly discover, like the name of a file, name of a registry key, something like that, and then you can hunt for that. So property-based indicators are what you usually want: registry keys, hashes, a mutex, which is a mark in the RAM of the machine, a handle, an open handle. And these are things you can easily detect with a scan, and we'll be doing it later with Velociraptor. So that's what they're good for. So there's methodology-based. There are anomaly-based indicators. There are less specific leads, where it's not as simple as just finding a file. It's just suspicious traffic. And that's something else you might have trouble finding, but there's a life cycle. You get some initial lead, then you create some indicators of compromise, you publish them. First you verify them, then you publish them. That's the life cycle. And then you scan your network for those indicators of compromise, and you find more bad stuff and more indicators of compromise, and you keep going until you're not finding anything new. And then you've found whatever you're going to find. So host-based indicators, the simplest thing, it's either there or not. And you probably need a set of observables depending on the quality of your indicator. Something like an MD5 of a no malicious file would be very clear. Something like the libraries loaded by a file is much less clear. Innocent files might load the same libraries, so if that's the kind of indicator you got, you'll have to combine it with something else to avoid a lot of false positives. Anyway, so here's an example from the malware analysis book. So here you got a file with an MD5 hash. If you search for that, then you will have essentially no false positives. I mean, if that's the hash, that's really the file. But the problem is, if there's another version of the file or any change, then this indicator will fail. So that's not the best indicator. If you look at the PE headers, the PE specifies the imports used by any executable file. And so if you look in the header and you see the time date and the file size, that might be better. So if you have something compiled at the same time at the same file size, you might figure that's pretty much the same file even if the hash doesn't answer. That's not bad. This gives you more likelihood of detecting an altered file, but more false positives. You could include the DNS cache. If you look for the DNS cache and see that this machine has recently called the command and control server, then that would be another indicator that something bad is happening. So you can combine these things. All right, so you're trying to get enough information to reliably detect it, but not too much time lost analyzing it, and not too slow for the scanner to process these this or that thing. Each one of them slows down your processing. Snort in particular is the standard for network traffic, and there are a bunch of snort rules that, because regular expressions can very easily be so expensive to process that they slow your scanner down and they don't work. You can even make a DOS attack with regular expressions. It's real easy to write something that looks reasonable, but in fact takes an essentially infinite amount of computer time to resolve. The import table is a list of libraries needed. Most programs use libraries in common patterns. Malware often uses strange patterns of libraries. We're talking about this in the malware analysis class. For example, they often use the native API instead of the high-level API you're supposed to use. So there are suspicious libraries. Here's the libraries this thing uses, or the import functions. And they don't look too terrible, but anyway, those are, if you do that, you'll probably get false positives, but you might combine that with something else. Anyway, there's an old attack called the SethC replacement. Still works on older versions of Windows, where you change one file. This is the file launched if you press the Shift key 5 times. That's the clue that I'm handicapped and I want to use the on-screen keyboard or something. But if you replace that file with command.exe, then pressing the Shift key 5 times gives you a command prompt as system, and you can hack into the box. That's an old trick. And so you place this file, press it Shift times. So if you want to detect that, you can also do it by messing with the debug handler. If you want to detect this attack, then you can look at that file, and you could check if the MD5 is this value, and that would mean it's cmd.exe. But I found out, to my horror, that simple files like Notepad and CMD in fact have many versions across different versions of Windows. I used Notepad and I said, how complicated could Notepad be? Well, Notepad is now going to have AI in it. It's crazy. So Microsoft does in fact keep changing these common system files for no apparent reason. When they seem to have no new functionality, they do keep changing them. So that MD5 won't really pick up all CMDs, so you might give it something else. You know, if it's this or the P header time and date, that sort of thing. Another way would be to just notice if it has the wrong file. CMD is bigger than Seth. This would be a whole lot easier. Whatever, this thing should really be Seth C. If it's bigger, that's bad enough. That would probably be a much more practical way, that even if it's not CMD, whatever it is, something bad is going on here. All right. You could also look for the debugger key. It's a registry key you can make there. So the debugger crash will launch this. That's another way to automatically launch it. And people have tried to make standard formats. This is pseudocode, so it looks sort of like a line of Python or something, but it isn't really. This is just sort of a way to write down the logic of it. And actually, to make machine-readable versions of indicators of compromise, there are some formats. OpenIOC is one of them, and there are others. I don't think the industry is really standardized on a standard way to prevent these indicators of compromise yet. So your network-based indicators. Let me just check for comments. All right. Cleaning me up pups and said she was hacked. Well, that's true. That's the thing. People think they're hacked if a bad thing is happening, but that's not really the same thing to an incident response person. All right. So you can look for, if you look for a certain set of bytes, that would be something. That's perhaps one clue, sort of thing. DNS monitoring is very popular. This is why a lot of companies want to get rid of DNS over HTTPS. If you don't use encrypted DNS, then the DNS makes it really easy to tell what everybody's doing and when they're doing it, and that's great for the network monitoring team. They can just see who's going to games, who's going to watch porn, who's doing all the bad things, and where they are and what time they did it. So, that's handy. All right. And so if you know a malicious domain name involved with the attack, you can totally see who's going there. Because DNS is incredibly simple. Query name, query type, and query class. There's not much to it. So it's a domain name. Domain names are split into labels and so on. All right. You have different fields for the name, the domain, the top-level domain, and the server name before it. All right, you can catch it in Wireshark and see it. There it is, practicalmalwareanalysis.com. Except the dot is not really a dot. The dot is a binary 3. It doesn't put the dot in. It just puts a separator for the field. I think it's just the length of the next field. So, but anyway, it's not too complicated. And so snort. There's a snort signature to detect this. Like I say, snort signatures really give you a headache. How complicated does it have to be? Well, it's pretty complicated. There's the message, and here's the content. If you have these 18 bytes, then these 3 bytes, then a null. I think that's what this means. So that's going to look for that pattern. Anyway, that's easier than a lot of them. But anyway, you can make a snort signature to detect that domain name on the wire. And so for dynamic analysis, you run TCP dump. Then you run the malware and just watch what it does. Pick up the network traffic with Wireshark or another tool. So it's pretty simple. All right. By the way, one thing that's come up many times in my classes, I mentioned you shouldn't be monitoring live network traffic with Wireshark on a network because of 2 reasons. The first thing is it'll just fill up the RAM and crash. But the second reason is it's not secure because Wireshark has these protocol handlers for thousands of protocols, and those are just written by amateurs and not audited. And some of them have vulnerabilities. So in principle, you can take over the machine by sending malicious traffic. That's why you're not supposed to use Wireshark to just monitor the network. You can monitor the network, you run TCP dump that just takes the traffic and saves it in a file without interpreting it, and then you analyze the saved file later with Wireshark. That's a thing to be aware of. Wireshark is not a continuous network monitoring tool. It's not very good for that at all. In fact, I should mention, I had a student last night that had a machine that froze up because they're running Process Monitor. Process Monitor watches the event log and thousands of instances per second, and it also puts them all in RAM. So if you let it run for maybe 10 minutes, it will fill up all the RAM and slow down your machine. Just like Wireshark will. These tools are not intended to be just running long term. You're supposed to just turn them on while you monitor one event and then turn it off to analyze what you captured. All right. So before you test thousands of systems, of course, test your IOCs. Go find a machine you know is infected and one you know isn't infected, and make sure that your indicators of compromise are not, triggering on a clean machine and so on. All right. So somebody gets email with a malicious payload, they run that. That's a Word document. So when they open that, that will then launch a second stage, remove the first one, and the second stage will run. This is very much typically how it works. This is how Metasploit payloads will work too. And so the less effective indicator would be properties of the dropper. The problem is the dropper is deleted. It doesn't stay around. So, but you might want that if you want to catch it on the wire before people receive it. Any email containing that dropper you don't want to block. That'd be a place to use that. A more effective one would be something in the prefetch directory, that means a certain executable has been run recently. That's pretty nice. File name for the innocuous Word documents left behind. Perhaps the calls in the browser history, DNS cache, the metadata for the second stage malware, and so on. These are more effective indicators to detect a machine that's actually infected. And so run it on a clean workstation. Make sure that it doesn't trigger on a clean workstation. If it does, then you're going to have to modify this to not allow false positives. Then run it on some systems to see if it hurts them. If your indicator is too complicated, it might consume too much CPU. This is something that keeps on happening every year or two. I think it was like 5 years ago, McAfee identified a necessary Windows file as malware and deleted it, breaking the system. This happens every few years. The defenses start triggering on innocent files and wiping them out. Another thing that happens a lot is you download like real legitimate utility, but your antivirus thinks it's suspicious because it's zipped or something and blocks you from installing it. So, this is an important thing to know. Make sure that your proposed script to hunt for things is not causing too much harm. And for internal leads from humans, you document the statement, interview people, you let them tell their story without interrupting them or biasing them, find out what they have to say, collect the facts. And, you don't even need to tell them that you think they're stupid and this isn't really a problem. You don't need to say it. You just collect the facts, say, okay, we'll investigate it. You want to find out what they say. And if you decide it doesn't matter, that's fine. But there's no point arguing with them or anything. You just want to know what they have to say. And, all right, if you have external people outside your company, like the people maintaining Dropbox and other companies may be involved, they don't have to tell you anything. And if they're wise, they probably will refuse to tell you anything, being afraid that they'd say the wrong thing and be tied up legally. And you can't demand it unless you can get a court order or something. So, that's an issue. Law enforcement can. They can get court orders, but if you just get hacked and you want information from somebody you have a peripheral relationship with, like Dropbox, unless it's in your service level agreement, they are unlikely to tell you much of anything. And so you can file lawsuits to get the records. You can find other legal mechanisms. If you have copyright infringement, then that might give you a way in with the DMCA. And of course, the other thing is report it to law enforcement and hope they will do something. But usually this is not to your benefit. Usually they don't do anything or they do too much. You're surrendering control of the investigation. That's why involving law enforcement is something most people do not want to do. That they would rather just resolve the incident quietly themselves than involve external agencies unless you have to. Anyway, you can file a subpoena sometimes to, if you're planning on suing people and so on, to demand information like about a subscriber. And of course, like I say, reporting to law enforcement may get some action, but it's generally not what our companies want to do. It doesn't really create the results of greatest value to the company quickly. It often creates action you don't want too late. And once you've started it, you can't stop it. So, you consider it very carefully before you hand over control of your investigation to some third party you can't stop. And so, Department of Justice is one place you can file complaints, all sorts of things. All right, and of course, if you have foreign entities involved, if you are outsourcing your stuff to a foreign nation, for example, this is a real problem. And that's why many companies are now talking about, great, we can fire the staff and replace them with AI. And these, I think, are the same people 15 years ago that said, oh, we'll fire the staff and outsource everything to India. And they found out that didn't really end up to be such a great idea. It turned out that the quality of service wasn't that good, and you didn't have much control over what they did there. And, in general, in both cases, there are reasons why this is not such a brilliant idea as you might think it is. So outsourcing your stuff to foreign countries now, what are you going to do when you have a complaint, when you need to get evidence from them, when you need to interview people and they aren't available? It's going to be nearly impossible to get data out of them. For high-profile cases that the FBI is really investigating, they have been getting cooperation. I've seen it when I go to the Secret Service meetings, the High-Tech Crime Investigators Association. They claim they're getting cooperation from other nations. But they're getting cooperation, for example, from Russia, but that was before the Ukraine war. I kind of doubt they're getting cooperation anymore, and I kind of doubt they're getting cooperation from China anymore either. I used to have Chinese students in my classes, and they all vanished about 2 years ago. They stopped all Chinese people from going to security conferences, from participating in CTFs or anything. They said, if you're any kind of security researcher, you have to tell us, and we will hoard those secrets here and not tell people. And so they've becoming more isolationist, just like we have. So I think getting cooperation from a foreign nation is probably not even harder than it used to be, at least across those barriers. Maybe you could get cooperation from an ally like Britain, but even so, it's pretty complicated. Hard to imagine you really want to do that unless you are a huge company and this is a really big issue. Anyway, law enforcement, of course, can investigate and prosecute and issue subpoenas, and they can demand information and demand that you don't tell the person they're being investigated and all that stuff. So they can do a whole lot more if you actually involve law enforcement and they're working with you, which you'd get if you are, for example, critical national infrastructure in America. If you're an oil pipeline or an energy company or a bank, you probably can work closely with law enforcement, and they probably really will do things on your behalf. But small to medium business typically don't have that kind of close relations, and the things that happen to them are not considered important enough for law enforcement to spend resources on them. So anyway, if you're going to get law enforcement involvement, then you better document things, maintain the evidence in a chain of custody, have a clear explanation of it, convey it to people. So as you move in, you should have a good relationship with law enforcement agencies. You should go to groups and meet them. You should know how to deal with law enforcement. It is something you might have to do. Don't be afraid of them, but you should be aware that you don't go to them until you have cleared it with your own legal department. Your company will decide we want to involve law enforcement or we don't. You don't just, as a random security person, involve an outside agency like that without permission. That will get you fired. That's a decision to be made carefully after consulting with your legal department. All right, and so InfraGard is a group you can join where you can meet FBI agents and hear from them. And the other one I mentioned before, let me just put it here, is the High Tech Crime Investigators Association. I mentioned it in my other classes, HTCIA. The High Tech Crime Investigators Association is the Secret Service, and it's apparently open to everybody now, so you can apply and get in, and they have very interesting meetings, and if you go there, you'll meet a lot of law enforcement types, and they have interesting talks by them and stuff, and it's a good way to develop some relationships. So are these others. All right, let's take a look at another Kahoot, which is here. This is 152, Chapter 5. All right. Only problem with the HTCIA is their meetings happen at like 8 a.m. on Tuesday. They're not at night or anything, so you have to be like, it often conflicts with work. But they're very interesting meetings. They're worth going to if you can manage to go there. Get organized enough to get there. I remember, I still have them in my office. I mean to throw them away, the batteries are all bubbled up and everything, That was just the early version of this. All right. So Tripwire sends out a false positive. So what's wrong with this lead? That's lack of veracity. If it tells you there's a problem, but the problem is not real. All right. All right. Every program and service in Windows is this kind of file. They're all portable executables. They're not all EXEs. There's EXEs, DILs, and COMs, which are the three types of executable files in Windows, but they are all in the container portable executable. They all have the same file header and ways to import libraries and such. All right, so what network protocol would give you the easiest and fastest indicator of malicious activity? DNS, easiest to monitor, easiest to understand, everybody's favorite. All right, what item is part of the PE header? Right, the import table, it needs to know what libraries to import to run the program. That's you, okay, I figured as much. Multiple winners. All right, good. So, let's stop this recording.